Hello and welcome to this latest video in our series of VCE Media Unit 1 Outcome 3 Australian Stories. And today we are looking at Bluey and the ABC. Now, this relates to two key knowledge dot points in the study design. Obviously, we are going to be looking at how the media codes and conventions are used to engage an audience and create meaning in Bluey. But for this one, we're also looking at the impact of institutional, economic, social, and political constraints on the production and distribution of media narratives. In particular, we're looking at this idea of institutional. So here, the ABC is the institution that contributes to the production and distribution of Bluey. So just thinking about Australian media narratives and how this might be different to the USA, where we consume a lot of media from, and other countries as well. So the amount and types of media text that we create in Australia is determined by many factors. Audience size is one. We have a relatively small population. Taxpayer funding, media ownership, cheap overseas importation of media products, film locations, the talent that we can use, so that the cast and crew, and the particular government of the day may choose to support or not support the local media industry. Now, it is a unfortunate truth that Australian films rarely tend to make a profit, or if they do, they tend to be extremely low budget. Compared to other, let's say, Hollywood or American productions, Australia's film industry really isn't big enough to compete. Now, this is sort of traditionally speaking, there are exceptions to the rule. And then when we look at, say, commercial television, so that's when we're talking about the main commercial networks that are made to make a profit. So I'm talking about Channel 10, Channel 7, and Channel 9. And then they do have additional channels attached to them. So, for example, 9 also has Go and Gem. These commercial TV networks, they tend to rely on producing cheaper Australian content, let's say game shows or reality TV or news. And they tend to do that rather than investing in Australian fictional narratives like dramas, comedies, etc. Because by producing things cheaply, you still get the same audience, and so that means you can actually make more money off advertising rather than producing a drama, which can cost lots and lots of money, and you only get the same amount of advertisers who want to spend with you. So it's really not as profitable. This is where the ABC comes in as being a really important Australian media institution. So the ABC, or officially known as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, it's considered to be Australia's national public broadcaster. So when we say public, it means that this is not owned by a commercial network. It's why if ever you watch the ABC on TV or listen to any ABC radio, whether that's Radio National, ABC Melbourne, or something like Triple J, you'll find that there's no advertising, right? Because there is no commercial aspect to the ABC. And this is why it plays a significant role in providing independent and comprehensive broadcast services to the Australian public. So it's not owned by any shareholders, it's not owned by any individuals. It is a media organisation established by law, and because of that, this federal law, it's governed by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Act of 1983. And most importantly, it is accountable to the Australian public through its board of directors. So that there is a board of directors that run the ABC, but essentially the people who it's responsible to are the Australian public, the Australian taxpayer, because it is taxpayer funded. The idea of the ABC is that it covers all Australians across the entire country. So that's what's resulted in 4 national TV channels, 4 national radio stations, dozens of local radio stations. So that includes things like ABC Melbourne 774. It's got a digital news platform. It's got streaming service, probably one of the best working streaming services. And it has other media resources all involved in the ABC. Now, because it is responsible to the Australian public, it has certain rules that govern what it can do and what it needs to prioritise. So if you think about Channel 7, Channel 10, Channel 9, well, they prioritise making a profit, right? Filling their shareholders' pockets, making sure that they're making money. The ABC doesn't have that goal. Instead, it's governed by a charter that establishes the terms by which it needs to operate. And so the key principles of this charter are that it must inform, educate, and entertain all Australians. So when we say inform, this means news programs, right? It needs to tell Australians what's going on. Educate, so that includes education programming, documentaries, shows like Gardening Australia that's teach people how to look after their gardens, as well as children's programs that are designed to educate kids. Play School's a great example. And it also needs to entertain. So there is pure entertainment, comedies, dramas, game shows, lots of different varieties of programming that is simply there to entertain. And the key aspect to this is all Australians. So this isn't just pitching to the biggest popularity or the biggest majority of Australians. So this is something that, say, the commercial networks will do, where they'll create a program that appeals to the majority. Instead, the ABC needs to appeal to everybody. So it needs to have kids programs. It needs to have programs that are targeted at teenagers who, no longer watch traditional television, and so therefore commercial TV networks tend not to pitch their programs to teens anymore. The ABC must, because it has to inform, educate, and entertain all Australians. The other thing that this includes is regional Australians. So there is regional radio stations, there are regional programs that are meant to appeal to people living in rural areas of Australia. Again, not just the majority who live in the cities. The ABC Charter also has the key principle that it needs to promote Australian culture and identity. This is obviously something that's really important to us looking at Australian stories. The ABC produces and broadcasts content that showcases Australian stories, perspectives, Australian arts and artworks, and we need to have a focus on Australia. Again, this differs from the commercial networks who, yes, they must produce a certain number of Australian content during the day, but they can import things from overseas. Now, the ABC does that as well, but one of their key principles is that they have to have Australian programming that is promoting Australian culture and showcasing what it is to be Australian. It also needs to foster public discourse. So it serves as a platform for public debate and discussion on various issues of national importance. This is where the ABC has lots of news programs, lots of opinion news programs. Things like Q&A, where we have two sides of an issue in Australia at the moment, kind of debating out those ideas. Now, the ABC does come under some fire for perhaps being biased towards one side of the argument, but their charter is that they have to foster public discourse. So they have to have these controversial programs. They have to have people that are speaking perhaps against government policy, etc. And then finally, in the ABC's charter, it needs to support the Australian media industry. Again, something that's really important to us in this unit, that it collaborates with independent producers and filmmakers. It also has its own journalists and production staff who create programs. The idea is this is meant to help to nurture and showcase Australian talent. So often this is where Australian actors, Australian directors might get their first break, because it's designed to keep the industry, the media industry, alive. So even if something, say, isn't particularly popular, it still might be produced because the idea is that, well, this isn't about reaching as many audiences as possible. Again, that's one of the goals of commercial media. Instead, it's to develop that talent. And so it's okay if only under 100,000 people are watching a particular program across the country, because it is supporting the Australian media industry. It's giving people media industry jobs and giving them the experience that perhaps they could develop into the media producers, directors, actors of the future. And so, importantly, when we are looking at the ABC and this idea of institutional and economic factors, we need to sort of understand where they get their money. Why is it that they can spend all this money on programs that actually aren't particularly popular? So it's worth noting that the ABC, it doesn't operate with investors. It doesn't get their money from direct commercial advertising. This is different to those commercial broadcasters that I mentioned before. And so it allows the ABC independence to maintain editorial integrity and impartiality in its programming. So if you don't have, let's say, a car company buying ads in your news bulletin, then you might be free to promote or talk about electric vehicles, for instance, because you don't have an old fossil fuel petrol-driven car company that is insisting that if you don't pull those positive stories about electric vehicles, then they won't pull their advertising. But something that we do need to think about is, is the ABC really that impartial? If it's getting its money from the Australian government, then does it mean that it needs to be positive about the government of the day? The federal government of Australia provides an annual budget allocation to support the operations and activities of the ABC. The specific amount can vary from year to year. Often around election times, you'll see bumper stickers and people complaining about hands off our ABC, because what typically happens is the Liberal government, so this is the right side of the political spectrum, tends to want to reduce spend for the ABC, whereas the left side, so the Labor government, tends to want to increase spend in the ABC, generally speaking. So if you were working for the ABC, which government would you rather be in power? The one that wants to give you more money to make more things and keep your job secure, or the one that wants to take those things away? I think it's reasonably obvious that the creep might come into your day-to-day practice, even if you're meant to be impartial, that maybe you prefer a Labor government being in power so that your job is safe. And this is one of the criticisms of the ABC, that their funding might influence their impartiality and skew them more to the left, to the Labor government. And this is, something that we can see in ABC programming. Another thing that influences their funding is commercial activities. So while they don't have advertising, they can merchandise their programming. So these include things like licensing content to international broadcasters, selling DVDs of the programs that they create, selling merchandise, so toys, for instance. This accounts for a small amount of ABC's revenue, but obviously, where we said before that they don't mind so much if they're producing things that aren't particularly popular. Obviously, if they produce things that are quite popular, there is a greater chance or incentive that they could turn these into commercial activities, again, get more funding for themselves. So even though they're not for profit, they want to make sure that they're keeping themselves alive, afloat, and getting some money in. And so this could impact the types of programs that they produce. So now looking specifically at one ABC program, and that is the short cartoon Bluey. If you have not seen this, you're in for a treat. This is something that, while it is pitched at kids, probably around age 3 through to 8, so this is something that's really alive in my household when I've got 2 boys within that age bracket. It's something that also appeals to parents and appeals to a wide range of people. So if you haven't seen it yet, this might actually appeal to you as we start to watch a couple of episodes. So Bluey, it's an Australian animated TV series. Like we said, it is targeted at preschool children, but it does spill into sort of that early primary age as well. And it premiered on ABC Kids on the 1st of October 2018. Since then, it has had 3 full seasons. And there is talk at the moment of a movie. The series was created by Joe Brum with Queensland production group Ludo Studios. So it is produced in Australia. Now, we just talked about ABC funding, and this series, it was co-commissioned by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in association with Screen Australia, which is another federally funded body that is there purely to invest in Australian local film and television. But it is also co-commissioned and so therefore financially contributed to by the BBC. Now, the BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation. So essentially, this is England's version or the UK's version of our ABC. With BBC Studios, it holds global distribution and merchandising rights. So BBC Studios actually are the ones that have the rights to make merchandise, make products, and distribute it across the globe. And so they have struck a deal with Disney Plus to release Bluey internationally. And so this is where you might find, if you're in certain circles on TikTok, where American viewers are really, really getting into Bluey, probably over the last maybe 2 years. So interesting there that by investing a little bit, BBC, a non-Australian company, holds some rights and can now make some profits off distributing Bluey across the country and making merchandise. So what I'd like you to do now is pause this video and follow the links to watch an episode of Bluey called The Beach. This was in the first season and features Bluey and her family, so her younger sister Bingo, mum and dad, going to a typical Australian beach. And hopefully now that you have watched that episode, I hope you've enjoyed it. There's some key things that I want to pick up in terms of analysing the representations in this 8-minute episode. So we can look at media codes, and we tend to look at the film codes. Even though this is animation, and animation does have its own set of codes, we can analyze this in terms of what we know about film codes. So the first one, mise en scène. So Bluey and Bingo, they both wear green and gold zinc, which of course is the Australian national colours. It's obviously not the colours of the Australian flag, but these are our competitive colours that are known across all of our sports teams internationally. Bluey's mum also wears a hat. We've got where they assemble the beach tent, and you can see the zinc and sunscreen on the towels there. And so what sort of representation does this create of Australia? Well, it represents the Australian sun and the Australian beach as a beautiful yet harsh landscape. The sun being potentially dangerous, but also a place where Australians play. So the need to take care around that. And this idea of this duality in the Australian landscape about being both perhaps threatening, full of threats, but also a place of joy and play is something that we can see throughout this episode. And so I don't know if you picked up on this still and thought back to our analysis of iconic Australian photography, but there is a purposeful reference in this episode where Mum or Chili is laying on the sand in a position that is reminiscent of Max Dupaine's classic photo Sunbaker or Sunbather. The lighting we can see here, we've got that harsh top light that's creating these hard shadows, reminiscent of the original photo. We have the visual composition of this photo being taken from the low to the sand, but also looking top down on the subject. And so, we are making these references to iconic Australian imagery, and so thereby cementing Bluey itself as an iconic Australian program. Further representations, we can see the setting of the beach itself full of different wildlife and natural phenomena. So we've got the crabs and the seagulls, the pippies that come up for a wee, the waves that take away Mum's footprints, the jellyfish that Bluey tentatively pokes with a stick, and the pelican who she has to tiptoe around. Again, this represents that duality of Australian nature being both beautiful and possibly threatening. And the acting of Bluey in this, we can see her going through the emotions of fear, of being tentative, of curiosity, and then bravery when she gives herself some of those positive self-talk. I'm the mermaid who got her legs only for one day, and is bravely exploring the Australian landscape. So those ideas or representations of Australian, particularly that depiction of the Australian landscape, is just one way in which Bluey shows what it is to be Australia and live in Australia and tell an Australian story. What I would like you to do now is, in a moment, once this video has finished, I want you to go and look at another episode of Bluey. This one's called Cricket. This is one of the more recent episodes, and over the summer, there was a voting poll about ranking Bluey's top 100 episodes. This one, Cricket, was ranked number 1. It is an episode that has really touched a lot of people and really sums up Australia's relationship to cricket, but also just Australian attitudes and what it is to be an Australian as represented through this sport of cricket. And so as you watch this, I want you to do what I kind of just did with the beach there, where I want you to refer to various media codes and use media language to describe 5 things that you think either promote Australian cultural identity or reflect or represent Australian culture and identity. And in a nutshell, tell an Australian story. And then once you've done that, I want you to sort of think, who's the audience for Bluey? I think I sort of covered that a couple of slides ago. And how does either or both the beach and cricket engage or appeal to this audience? And then I also want you to think about, in what ways does this inform, educate, and entertain this Australian audience? What aspects of these 2 episodes are entertaining? Hopefully you'll find lots that's entertaining. What aspects are maybe educational or informative? And so this is the end of this video. Enjoy Bluey, go down the rabbit hole, watch many, many more. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll wish you had younger siblings who you could respectfully watch it with, rather than feeling like you're watching a kid's program as an older person. But enjoy Bluey and answer those questions, and I appreciate you watching this video. Thank you.